So I want to give you a little bit of history of kind of how I came to the tiger taming. I was born with a tiger, but I wasn't born with this tiger taming concept. So my husband and I have 2 sons by birth, and we had decided to add to our family, and we adopted a little girl from Nicaragua. She was in an orphanage from about 18 months old till 7, and we adopted her. And so through that process of adoption, I realized that parenting through adoption was going to be different than parenting biological children. So I was reading books and about attachment and all this. I was not a therapist at the time. Had another whole career doing something different, being a mom, all that good stuff. So I got fascinated. I got fascinated by the attachment piece. I got fascinated by the impact that early neglect, early trauma has on the brain. And the biological part of that, of what happens. So I decided to grow up and go back to school and become a therapist and work with this population, because a lot of it is still very misunderstood. A lot of traditional types of therapies don't hit the types of parts of the brain we need to be hitting for these kids. In school, all my papers were on attachment, all my papers were on trauma. Every article I could get my hands on, every assignment I had, that was what my focus was. I immediately started getting jobs in the field so I could learn. Worked as a case manager in post-adoption support. I worked in a residential facility for eating disorders, female eating disorders, all of that while I was on my school journey and becoming a therapist. At the same time of now raising an adopted child in our home. One of the aforementioned wonderful sons that we have also has sensory processing disorder. So on a personal side, I was looking for things to help him and learn more about his situation. And that's where I actually found out about ILS. Had nothing to do with my therapy work, had nothing to do with trauma, I thought it was more of sensory processing. And that's where I found ILS, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but it's integrated listening systems. And it's the cornerstone of the tiger taming program that we have. As I'm also doing trainings over on the therapy side on developmental trauma, you guys are familiar with Dr. Bruce Perry. He's a child psychiatrist, Child Trauma Academy. So I went to a training that one of his fellows gave in Richmond, talking about the brain and the hierarchical brain. It was focused on play therapy. It was actually a play therapy conference. And even about how some types of play therapy still are not reaching the parts of the brain that need development. And I noticed as I took my ILS training and I was taking the trauma training over here, it was very similar, that they were talking about these different areas of the brain, and the brain develops hierarchical and things like this. And ILS was developed by an audiologist, and then the developmental trauma piece that Bruce Perry is talking about is more from the mental health perspective. But then I went, wait a minute, it's the same brain. Just perspectives and what goals that they're coming after it. So there was so much overlapping. I found a lot of interest in that, and how these systems might actually be helpful over in the mental health field. So that's where that came in. And then the polyvagal theory, which is Dr. Stephen Porges, talks a lot about the role the vagus nerve plays in that. And we'll talk more about how the vagus nerve is actually what kind of calms the tiger down and plays a really big role in regulation.